There have been lots of different Spider-Man shows in the past, some good, some great, and others that were just somewhat average. And even though everyone has their own specific favorite Spider-Man cartoon, and specifically relating to the Spectacular Spider-Man being considered as the greatest animated series for Spider-Man ever created, there is one that hasn't gotten the recognition that it should. I'm talking about a series so epic, so vibrant, and so action-packed that it can't possibly be matched by any other standard of the cartoons that we have today for Spider-Man. And even though I loved watching the 90s animated series Spider-Man cartoon that aired on Fox Kids while I was growing up, it didn't fully impact me just as much as this other cartoon did. Now keep in mind, I'm not trying to tell you that this particular animated series is better than whichever your personal favorite is, but in my opinion, this is the most definitive animated version of Spider-Man that we have ever seen. And if you haven't figured out which show I'm talking about, I'm mainly discussing about Spider-Man, the new animated series. No, not that one. No, anything but that one. When I'm talking about the new animated series, I'm not talking about that one on Disney XD, I'm talking about this one right here. That intro gets me every time. But moving on, yes, we are talking about Spider-Man, the new animated series that debuted all the way back in 2003. Now keep in mind, the last Spider-Man cartoon that we got before this was Spider-Man Unlimited, which was kind of a spin-off series of the old school 90s cartoon. And the reason why I bring this up is because this is technically the very first Spider-Man cartoon that debuted in the year of the 2000s. And seeing how Spider-Man Unlimited got below average reviews when it came to critics, this was actually a pretty big deal seeing a brand new Spider-Man show on a really big network. And you might be thinking to yourself, what type of sophisticated network would host a brand new Spider-Man series?
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
That's right, MTV hosted the rights for the new animated series Spider-Man cartoon all the way back in 2003. And as of this day, I still have no idea why on earth a company like that would hold a Spider-Man show on their channel. But no, in all seriousness, MTV did actually own the rights to Spider-Man, the new animated series, because Sony really wanted to have this show be broadcasted on a network that was mainly used for kids. Nowadays, most kids don't really know what MTV is, but back in the early 2000s, it was all the rage. At least, that's what we thought. You see, even though this show had lots of fans attached to it, it sadly didn't get enough good reviews or ratings for it to continue with a second season. And I gotta tell you, nothing frustrates me more knowing that this amazing series would have gotten a second season featuring awesome characters like Gwen Stacy, Mysterio, Vulture, and possibly even Venom. But in all reality, even though we didn't get the second season of Spider-Man, the new animated series, I'm still very, very pleased with what we got with this first season. But before we talk about the ins and outs of this show, I want to give all of you a history lesson about what this show was originally going to be. And believe it or not, you may actually be surprised in how this show was originally going to turn out. Now, for those of you who don't know, this show was originally going to be an animated series for the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. And even though we did end up technically getting a Ultimate Spider-Man animated series later on after this show released, this was originally going to be a full-on tribute to that comic series from Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley. However, back in the year of 2002, a little small movie came out by the name of Spider-Man and absolutely dominated box offices worldwide and ended up getting lots of people interested within the Spider-Man character. And I myself was in that same group of people who were exposed to Spider-Man for the very first time with this movie. And not only did that absolutely blow my mind seeing this movie on the big screen for the very first time as 4 years old, but I just knew right from the get-go after I saw that movie that I was absolutely in love with Spider-Man. And after the huge success that was the very first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire, this show then switched gears from being an Ultimate Spider-Man show to being a continuation of that movie. Now, even though this show ended up taking place within the quote-unquote Raimi-verse of Spider-Man movies, it didn't connect within Spider-Man 2 or Spider-Man 3. This is mainly because the writers of the new animated series had things done within the show that did not fall in line with the creators of the movies. For example, during my favorite episode of the show, Law of the Jungle, Curt Connors actually ends up dying by the end of the episode. But as we see in Spider-Man 2, Curt Connors encounters is absolutely fine. So even though this series can be seen as a one-off to connect with the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, if it did get a second season, it would have had characters in the show that connected to Spider-Man's relationships and actually new villains for him to fight. So not only is the show called the new animated series, or TNAS for short, because of how it was new back in the year of 2003, but the fact of the matter is everything about the show was brand new. Instead of this show using casual animation like we've seen in previous Spider-Man cartoons, this series actually traded off for using full-on CGI for the entire series, which is one of the reasons why I love it so much. Even though some people say this animation hasn't aged well, back in the year of 2003, this was really cutting-edge technology. And the way on how the animators made Spider-Man move like we've never seen him move before was just something that absolutely blew my mind when I saw this show for the very first time. Plus, the environments that we see throughout the cities, like city shots, or Spider-Man in the subway, or just Spider-Man swinging through the city itself, is absolutely amazing to look at. And one of my favorite parts about the show is whenever they show off the college campus that Peter goes to at ESU. Since this show takes place within the Sam Raimi universe of Spidey lore, Peter is in college instead of in high school. And for me personally, some of the best scenes that involve Peter whenever he pops up in the show is usually when he's just hanging around campus with Harry or MJ. So not only do you get these awesome superhero moments with Spider-Man swinging around and fighting tons of bad guys, but you also get these short, sweet moments with Peter just hanging out with his friends. And even though this same situation has been handled within the Spectacular Spider-Man or even Spider-Man the 90s show, it still is awesome to see it be played out here. And this primarily goes a long way due to all the incredible voice acting that the show has. Almost the entirety of the voice cast does a phenomenal job with their roles in the show, but for me, the best standout performance has to go to Neil Patrick Harris as Peter Parker. Even though there have been tons of voice actors out there in the past who have played Spidey like Josh Keaton and Christopher Daniel Barnes, one of the reasons why I love Neil's performance so much is because of how vivid he can be as Peter and Spider-Man. Whenever you hear Neil voicing as Peter, he's a bit more timid and also a bit more shy. But whenever you see Spider-Man on screen, his voice goes a bit deeper and he's a bit more serious as well, along with also delivering all those classic one-liners. And in my opinion, Neil ranks on my top 5 list of most favorite voice actors for Spider-Man, because I think he does a phenomenal job in this show, and he was brought back within Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions to reprise his role as the Amazing Spider-Man. So that just goes to show what a great job he did within this series. And the main aspect of the show that drew me in instantly, besides the new voice cast, the new type of animation, and the new story that they were telling, is flat out all the new characters that were involved in this series. Usually in the normal Spider-Man shows, we would get all the classic villains like Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Sandman, and more. But once again, since this show was called the new animated series, they also decided to create absolutely 100% brand new characters for this show alone. And even though some of these characters in the show may be a bit hit or miss, like Christina the crazy psycho stalker or even the Gaines mind control twins, I still really like the intellectual idea of creating brand new characters for this show. Turbojet was pretty much a brand new version of Rocket Racer, Shikata was pretty much a brand new version of Elektra, Talon was basically a different version of Black Cat, and Pterodax was actually inspired off of Vulture. And even though some of the episodes featuring the newer characters like the Biker Twins weren't that intriguing, there were some standout ones like the Pterodax episode, which I found really heart-wrenching and absolutely thrilling. And seeing how Spidey deals with all these situations during the show really makes you think on how he's going to handle a different character in the next episode. But even though there are all these newer characters, there still were the classic villains just done in a different way, like Electro, Lizard, Silver Sable, Kingpin, and Kraven. And I know some people are wondering why Kingpin was black in the show, but mainly it's because the creators were trying to pay homage to the Daredevil movie that also came out in 2003. And not only did they just change Kingpin's skin tone, they also got him to be voiced by Michael Clark Duncan himself to reprise his role as Kingpin. And for me personally, I think he did an excellent job within the movie and the show. And out of all the classic villains that appear in this show, my favorite easily has to go to the Lizard. Even though I absolutely love how Electro's story arc was handled within the show, dealing with stuff like depression and bullying on Max Dillon's side, I still really love how Lizard was handled within this series. Not only is Law of the Jungle my favorite episode within the show, it also expands the Raimi side of the Spidey lore by dealing with more information regarding to Norman Osborn. Plus, the fight between Spidey and Lizard are some of the most cinematic shots I've ever seen within a Spider-Man cartoon. And crazy enough, even though the show was mainly advertised towards kids and teenagers, it actually had some really dark moments within the series. Not only did the series have some slight vulgarity when it came to the characters' dialogue exchanges, but it also had some flat-out deaths of characters within certain episodes. And for me personally, the top 3 most shocking deaths within this series would have to go to Electro, Lizard, and Richard Damien. Since Electro's origin was a complete complete accident within this show, and Max Dillon himself was a really relatable character to the audience. It was a real surprise seeing him quote-unquote die within the episode of When Sparks Fly when he explodes in the New York harbor. But what surprised me even more is the utter demise of Curt Connors in the Lizard episode. The way on how they tie in this version of Curt Connors within the Sam Raimi universe along with this show is absolute genius. Plus, this is hands down one of my favorite designs of the Lizard ever. So seeing him flat out drop from the sky above to splat on the New York streets below was something that truly shocked me when I first saw that episode. And even though it was truly upsetting to lose that awesome character within this show, nothing surprised me more than having an actual decapitation go on this show and left untouched. I never understood what was happening within this scene the first time I saw it as a kid, but rewatching this entire episode now, I am absolutely stunned that they were able to get away with this within this series. And these are just some of the many reasons on why I love this show's dark tone so much. Not only are there actual serious circumstances within certain episodes of this series, but it also really deals within a mature storyline for Spider-Man. Even though Spidey does throw lots of jokes around, it doesn't overdo it and it doesn't make the show seem cheesy in any way. Whenever Spidey does end up cracking a joke within the show, you always know that your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is gonna come in and save the day, even though some of the situations are really grim. And seeing how each episode did have stakes for Spider-Man and Peter to deal with at the same time, it just made the show even more of a high-octane thrill ride for you to enjoy. And even though lots of new characters were introduced within this series, along with a really newer and darker tone that we haven't seen before for Spider-Man, the one thing that absolutely makes this series for me is the amazing soundtrack. When it comes to different Spider-Man cartoons, the one thing that I always try and keep an ear out for is actually what type of soundtrack that the show has. And when it comes to previous Spidey cartoons, they've always had a really interesting soundtrack attached to them. For example, the 90s show had a very heroic score, while the Spectacular Spider-Man had a very cinematic score. But regarding the new animated series, the route they took is a more techno/synthwave score. And the way on how each new episode provides a really unique form of soundtrack relating to the different scenario that Spider-Man is finding himself in really puts you in a trance when it comes to watching all these different episodes. For example, the music that plays while Spidey is fighting the Lizard gives you a really cool tribal and jungle vibe. Whereas the music that's playing within the Silver Sable episode is really espionage-y and very mysterious as well. And even though I love the storytelling and the animation of this series, easily my favorite part about it is the soundtrack. And that easily goes to these two legends, John Digweed and Nick Muir, for making this incredible score. Now, even though there are lots of upsides to this show, the one thing that almost everyone agrees upon is that the ending of this series is absolutely awful. So to sum it up for you, during the season finale of this series, Peter is absolutely distraught over the loss of his friend and sometimes lover, Indy. This is sadly because the Gaines twins use their mind powers to have Spidey push Indy off the top of a rooftop and have her go into a coma. And in doing so, the entirety of New York City now thinks that Spider-Man is either some kind of vigilante or even a murderer. And even though Peter does end up taking out these terrible twins, he still is so distraught over the loss of Indy that he actually decides to quit being Spider-Man. And I'm sure if the show had received a second season, we would have seen Peter return at some point as Spider-Man in a really cool way. But sadly, seeing the show end on how it did just made me really upset. Still, that doesn't stop me from loving every other episode that appears within this awesome series. Given how visually compelling the show was every time Spider-Man showed up on screen, along with the incredible music that went along with the series, I think what we got was something truly extraordinary. And for me personally, it's sad to see how a well-written, really mature Spider-Man series is now being overthrown with this. Ugh, I still cringe to that till this day. But alas, even though this show was very short-lived, it still has quite a big audience of fans that really do enjoy this series and is considered to be a cult classic among Spidey fans. But even though this show isn't as popular as Spectacular is, everything about this show just screams Spidey to me, and it shall always be near and dear to my Spidey-loving heart. And since today is the show's 15th anniversary, I just want to personally thank each and every person who was awesome enough to help work on this amazing series. So to everyone out there who worked on this show who is possibly watching this video, I just want to say thank you for the awesome ride.
Too bad no one told me that being a superhero is an impossible game to win. Or that the ones closest to me would always suffer the most. Some who hold a grudge against me. And some who tried to give me so much, only to lose everything. I don't want to cause any more pain here. I can't live with that burden any longer. So it's time for me to say goodbye, Spider-Man.
And welcome to the after party, Spidey Squad. So anyways, guys, that was the end of my look back at the awesomeness that is Spider-Man, the new animated series. I hope you really enjoyed this video. It was a bit more scripted than what I usually do, and a bit more in-depth as well, but I just really wanted to take time to fully appreciate the awesomeness that is this show. As I said in the video, besides being able to grow up with the 90s show with Christopher Daniel Barnes, I also fully grew up on this amazing show, and specifically with the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie, so this was an awesome segue into learning more about Spider-Man as a kid through this awesome show. Even though it had a darker tone, I still really loved everything about it, and specifically, huge props to Nick Muir and John Digweed, who actually composed the score for this show. One of the biggest reasons why I love this show so much is because of the soundtrack that it has, as I said in the video. But just overall, with the animation, the feel, the vibe, the just pure epicness that is this show pretty much. I'm just so happy that after 15 years, it's still my personal favorite. And even though it may have not aged fully well, for me personally, I still think it looks really awesome. And this is still up to date my favorite Spider-Man show of all time. So I just wanted to say thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you excuse me, I'm going to go back and watch the whole show over again to celebrate its 15th year anniversary, because what better way to do that than to just watch that show all over again. So until next time, guys, thank you all so much for watching. Stay spectacular, Spidey fans. Peace out.
Sorry.